Welcome to part 2 of my nonfiction November reading vlog. If you want to know what I read or started at the beginning of the month, tune in to part 1. Otherwise, stay here and you can just hear about how the end of the month went. I just finished Palestine by Joe Sacco. I think I've been reading this since sometime last month. This is a graphic nonfiction, comic journalism. I don't know the right word for it, but Joe Sacco visited Palestine. I think this was originally put out. The dates say between 1993 and 95. So I would imagine he was in Palestine in the early to mid-90s, interviewing people and talking to them about just their experiences as Palestinians. And he's telling these people stories in the framing of how he found them. So he's talking about his time in Palestine, the things that he's observing, how he's treated by the people, and the conditions that the people are living in. So there are multiple stories going on. The actual individual experiences that he's sharing are very profound, and I definitely see why this is on a lot of lists. I would definitely recommend it to people who are trying to understand this situation, because there are just so many parallels between the stories that these people are telling and the stories that I'm seeing online, and just, the behaviors of the state of Israel. It just makes some of the specifics of what's happening, some of the war crimes being committed, consistent, unfortunately unsurprising. There's a lot of really relevant, really profound things in this. I have things to say about the framing of the story as well, because I have complicated feelings about the framing. So like I said, he's telling these stories as he's telling his story of being in Palestine. And first of all, I think it's interesting and cool to see how these folks are. They all treat him with a lot of hospitality. He has so much tea. People are feeding him, despite being very impoverished and economically struggling. During parts of this, he's literally in a refugee camp. People have no floors, and yet they're still, giving him food and tea and whatever, and offering their house, offering the warmest place in their house. Another part of the framing is also him and his understanding. He makes some comments that were very uncomfortable. He talks about some of his biases outright, and even in parts of it, he talks about kind of rushing people to finish up their stories of their children dying, which is horrific, but it's, I think, certainly it's saying something about the Western gaze, and not, I think, just him as a journalist, but also the people consuming this, and not just that, but also other journalists who are writing on these same things, kind of what's going through their heads. And I've had really mixed feelings. I'm glad that he did all of this, because I much prefer something that shows a lot of someone's biases rather than something that shows nothing, because you can at least see the lens that they're using. The idea of unbiased reporting or having an unbiased perspective at all it's preposterous. All you're doing is hiding or trying to hide whatever bias you have. So I like that he's emphasizing these things, and understand why he's hopefully overemphasizing. But I still found it distracting and kind of irritating. And some of it was quite sexist, but again, I understand why he's doing what he's doing. There's a point to it. I was personally annoyed by it, but I understand it on a thematic and artistic level. And even as I was kind of like describing all of that, I was having even more contention because I was kind of leaning towards, you know, a lot of it being annoying. And I mean, I personally was annoyed in the moment reading it. Obviously, that's not going to change. But I do think that kind of stepping away from it and thinking about it a bit, I appreciate it more. Especially, I wasn't even like putting it in context with like other journalism. That's also interesting to look at and think about through this as well. So this was very layered, very profound. I would definitely recommend it. I'm still working through how I personally feel about like some of the framing, but again, that's kind of a small detail in all of this. But there's that. So far as other things, I've been reading a little bit on some like books related to like tarot and spirituality, which I'm still not really sure how to approach like how much to talk about some of those books, just because like some of it is that I'm like learning, so I don't really, you know, have much to say on some of the stuff that I read like about that. Although the couple of books that I've gotten recently have been quite interesting. So, but at this point, it's likely that I'll listen to more Britney Spears' memoir tonight. If I still feel like physically reading, I'll probably actually dip into some fiction, because I have volumes 2 and 3 of The Case of the Bleeding Wall that I've received. I read the first volume in October and liked it, but it was kind of hard to like have a full, you know, full thoughts about it, because it's literally an issue. It's 20 pages. So like it was okay, but you know, I just don't have full thoughts. And now I have more of the story, so hopefully I can read and have more significant thoughts on it. I finished Britney Spears today. I think this is the next day. From the last update that I did. I finished Britney Spears' book. I started it on audio. Probably like a week ago or something. I don't know how time works. I will say that she would have done well with a co-author or a really good editor, because there was definitely technically some stuff that like you know, could have been edited out or could have been expanded or described differently or less repetitively. But that aside, I'm glad that I read it. There was well, first of all, the fact that she is now able to tell her story is phenomenal. She was in a conservatorship, which the book details, and really, I think that a lot of her story really highlights some of the really big failings of our culture, or some really like big problems. And of course, I mean, I read like social science books a lot of the times. There's a lot of ways that we can see this stuff, but seeing it all happen to a celebrity, someone who is very well off, I think just says a lot. Especially like she was, you know, I grew up with the press talking about her as they did. I was born in 93. I actually don't know what year the whole her shaving her head thing was, but I remember seeing that in the news media and people acting like she was so, you know, crazy or whatever. And she details a whole lot in this book, and definitely, you know, misogyny and stuff that you would expect. Like, I think it's, some things are like more obvious than others, but she also talks about stuff like postpartum depression, which heavily influenced some of her behaviors that the press decided to leech onto. And she goes into detail in just how the men who broke up with her benefited from that, whereas she was put in a totally different light. Stuff like that. But also the whole thing with the conservatorship, you know, with stuff like Justin Timberlake and Kevin Federline. I literally only know him because he is Britney Spears' husband. I could not identify him in a lineup of people. Like, they all benefited from this, but they were already at some sort of celebrity status, right? Meanwhile, her dad is just some guy. I mean, he's Britney Spears' dad, but that's about his only claim to fame, and he was still able to do all this, you know, control all of her assets and do all this stuff. He had an, you know, abusive, alcoholic past, and was able to posit her as having all of these different problems. And my next up on the audiobook docket is Jill Duggar's book. I think that's the right Duggar sister. The one who most recently put out a book. Yeah, that's Jill. Ginger also recently put out a book, but I'm just, I think, a little bit more interested in Jill's. Most of what I know from the Duggars is from Fundy Friday, so I have an idea of what I'm going into, and a big focus of Jill's book is also, at least her more recent stuff, is about her dad being controlling and stuff, and this is without a conservatorship or anything like that, just with that culture that kind of breeds some of that. So I was expecting to see the connect, partly like, you know, the child star bit. Granted, Britney Spears and Jill Duggar are different types of child stars, different types of issues, but I think that the abusive dads and neglectful in that situation moms are probably going to be a larger connect, although I'm thinking of all the societal things that would be interesting to see. They most likely have, you know, a lot more overlap than that. But anyways, I am rambling heavily. I think the Britney Spears book will probably bring light, or has brought light, to a lot of things that people don't want to talk about or haven't talked about as much. I think that, you know, I mean, Britney Spears fans, or people who are interested in Britney Spears, are a pretty, like, wide variety of people, but she talks about stuff like postpartum depression, general mental health, also being, like, heavily, like, manipulated, and the experience of, like, having, like, had experienced trauma and, like, dealing with that post-traumatic stress without, you know, any sort of frameworks. And then the conservatorship, which that's, I think, the big thing that I haven't really heard people talk about. Like, I feel like the conversation around mental health and misogyny and all these different things are something that have been more in the front of the public mind, but I didn't really hear people talk about conservatorships outside of very kind of specific spaces, like when we're talking about disability justice or whatever, until Britney Spears stuff was talked about. So that's a lot of words for all of this, but it was an interesting book. Honestly, even with the, like, kind of, like, technical issues, I understand why she wouldn't want a heavy editor or a co-writer, just the nature of what she's been through. So, yeah, if you're remotely interested, I think it's worth picking up. Just to kind of bear that in mind. But, you know, even despite that, you know, certain sections kind of taking me out of it, there were also some pretty profound, you know, lines and stuff. Anyways, I'm gonna crochet and watch a little bit of Booktube, while I wait on my laundry to be done, and then maybe start the Jill Duggar book. We'll see what happens. For me, has been an extremely foundational experience in ways I can't even fully explain. small update. So I mentioned wanting to start the Jill Duggar audiobook, because I got that in, and I did start it. I'm about 20% of the way into it, which I think is a little less than an hour and a half, but I've been listening to it on 1.5 times speed. And if you're interested enough, you can do the math on that, because I'm not going to. But it's kind of it's slow going on one level. Like, I feel like I've spent more time with it than I actually have, I think. Like, we're still pretty firmly in her childhood at this point. We've had like a very small glimpse into her 20-something, so maybe it will be a little bit faster past this, and maybe I should give it a little bit more time, because I'm barely a quarter of the way into it. So it feels like it's taking forever, and like a lot of the stuff in there is just a lot in a quiet way. Like, it's not as though she's describing like a ton of like super graphic. A lot of the stuff she described as positive or neutral within the moment, although I kind of assume from the stuff that I've heard, like interviews and bits and pieces, that obviously not all of it is good. And I imagine that'll come later, but it's just hard to like see some of the stuff just happening, like some of the talking points that they have, or things she's having to deal with, like putting on like a particular face and like whatever, is just anxiety inducing. And I think being an oldest sibling, that kind of like over perfectionism and very much bending to the will of other people is like, it's a little too close to home, and it's a lot being in that, on top of the fact that it's in this environment that's like extra, like there's a lot going on. So a weird combination of like discomfort and anxiety, and also it being just kind of slow. It is better written than the Britney Spears memoir on a technical level, which is probably one of the reasons why it feels so slow. Because there are kind of like longer scenes, but things that, like, I don't know, I'm gonna start blabbering into things that are like half baked in my brain that I can't even say for sure, because I'm only 20% of the way into the book. But I also got my hold on A Minor Course by Billy Ray Belcourt. I haven't actually read any Billy Ray Belcourt, which is like wild, all things considered. A lot's been on my TBR, so I don't know how I'm just now getting to it, but it is very good so far. Rarely when I listen to audiobooks will I kind of put tabs, but I've already marked a few things, and that means that I need to get a copy of it, because I want to actually like highlight these different parts. And it's a very good book. And I'm curious to know how much is based on actual events, because the whole thing is about a character who's writing a novel in grad school and is interviewing different people for the novel. So character being an indigenous queer person in academia, and also talking to different indigenous people in order to inform his novel, so that it can be more communal or community based in some ways. So it would be interesting to know how much of this is fictionalized versus not. And this has been really cool to read, in as someone who's like been in academia. There's a lot there to look at. There's also a lot that's really intense in different ways, so I think I'm setting it down for the night, just because I need like a little bit of levity, because one of the scenes kind of like brought me back to some kind of place, and I just need to take a breather and come back to it. But I am looking forward to reading more of it, to finishing it. This one is only, I think, 4 hours or so. So I probably will finish it in the next few days or so. So that's where I'm at on that. Otherwise, I've actually been trying to, when I was listening to Billy Ray Belcourt, I was cleaning and trying to change over decoration stuff. Kind of taking down some Halloween and leaving up or putting up other fall stuff, and a sprinkling of winter things. Mostly in the kitchen. We've got scarecrows and harvest. But also some new Christmas wear and still some leftover Halloween. But it's fun. It's good. Similar things happening here. This is gonna be some like red kind of Christmas cups. I set up this coffee nook a few months ago, and I'm really loving being able to change around the decorations and stuff and move things around. Ignore the bottom part, that's chaos. But yeah. If there's a new blanket, she's gonna lay on it. Okay, I finished a few things, or not a few things, I finished one thing. Started something else. Not nonfiction though, but that's fine. Unfamiliar by Haley Newsome. It's due at the library 3 days ago, so I read it today. Hopefully we'll get the second one soon because it's super cute. The whole premise is that there's this witch. She can only really do food magic, and she moves into a new town, finds out that her house is extremely haunted, so she has to make friends so that they can help her exorcise her house, take the ghosts out. But it's very cute. I love all the little characters. They all have little familiars, little animal friends. There's a whole layout of the characters. You can kind of see like the style. And so I don't know, it's just really good and cute. I think it's on Tapas, so I may read it there if the library takes too long giving me the second volume. And then I started Dinosaur Sanctuary Volume 1, keeping with graphic novels. And this is cute. It's mostly like a slice of life, but at a dinosaur park. In this alternative whatever, they like, I think, find a dinosaur that hadn't gone extinct and then are able to like basically remake them somehow. And dinosaur parks they become super, super popular, and now it's to the point where the interest is starting to decline, but the main character is still really enthusiastic, and she's just starting her job as like a zookeeper at one of these places, and is really interested in like the idea of like humanizing the dinosaurs in the popular psyche, if that makes sense. Like not seeing them as just kind of one-dimensional, but seeing them as living creatures that are complex and everything. And the really neat thing about this is this person actually consulted with a scientist. And so at the end of each chapter, you actually get a little thing from them talking about the type of dinosaur that was featured in the previous chapter, in the chapter, with little details like in one of the chapters you see this big dinosaur kind of like sit. It's just like sitting as a part of it, but it explains why they had it sit this sort of way, because it's hard to figure out how a living creature, there's a lot of kind of guessing that goes on, which is why our understandings of dinosaurs have like changed so drastically. But it's very cool. I like it. I'm a little over halfway through. it's super cute, and I don't know how the larger plot is going to go, because I mean it's mostly like her adjusting, and there's also some things with the actual happenings in the park. But I can see myself actually wanting this series just because it's just so good. I don't know. But yeah, that's where I'm at. I haven't listened to my audiobooks, I think, since my last update. Oh, the penguin. Oh. Update from bed because I'm tired. I listened to a little bit of a minor chorus. Still good, still going. And I finished Dinosaur Sanctuary Volume 1, which is really cool. Like slice of life-ish, but a dino zookeeper. I feel like I might have talked more in depth about it earlier when I read, I think I read a little more than half of it on Tuesday, but I finished it today. There is a little part of the plot about, like the main character's dad is somehow connected to something traumatic that happened with the dinosaurs, or like with the genetic engineering. I forget the details exactly because they have been sparse, because I think we're leading up to some backstory in the next volume or two. So that's cool. It's exciting. And I like that they have actual information about the dinosaurs interspliced, which also makes it like, if, you're gonna read some fiction during nonfiction month, it might as well be something like that. It's definitely something that I'll be continuing, and eventually something that I want copies of just because I really like it. So I finished a minor chorus, and wow. So I feel like I've probably said what it's about. This is a novel about an Indigenous grad student who is interviewing a bunch of people from his hometown in order to write a novel. So we've got aspects that are very meta about novel writing, but basically you get snippets from a lot of different people throughout the town, as well as his experience being back in his hometown and like talking about connection in these different ways, both in terms of like, he talks about sexuality, but he also talks about his connections with these various people that he's talking to. So there's a lot happening, and there are a lot of different stories within this story, and it kind of wraps around these themes of like the experience of being Indigenous in a place that's is being colonized, and like I said, connection, also happiness and community in a lot of ways. I feel like there are a lot of ties throughout the whole story, and I don't usually bookmark audiobooks a whole lot, but this one I did, which I think means I need to get a physical copy to mark up, and to reread. The writing itself was just so beautiful, and I would like to be able to reread it kind of knowing what's going to happen, because there were a few parts where I think I got caught up in my own thoughts and memories that were kind of only tangentially related to the book. Just it talks about some intense things, and but anyways, that was very good. It's Black Friday, so I also got off of work after just a ridiculous day. Not as ridiculous as other past Black Fridays, but still unpleasant. And I get to go back there again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, so we'll see what happens. I started the Martyrdom of Colin's Catch the Bear, and I have mixed feelings, and I really, really wish that I could find someone else who's read the book, because Instagram even like looking up the hashtag of the author's name, there's nothing. It's only got 2 like written reviews on Goodreads and a handful on Amazon and like nothing on Storygraph, and the only thing I can find in terms of reviews is stuff like Kirkus and like other things like this. The person who wrote the book is the guy who one of the people that represented Collins legally. The thing that I'm concerned about is that pretty early on in the prequel, it says that at a certain point Collins wanted so this guy started out writing a whole lot about the case, I guess with the intentions of writing a book. This is a prolific lawyer who's written several books by the looks of it, but was asked specifically by Collins to stop writing about his case, and then he did that and set it aside for like decades. But I don't quite know why he picked it up. Like the next thing that he said is that he lost contact with Collins. I'm kind of disturbed a little bit, I guess, at the idea that he would still write about this, despite what this person is asking. So I'm on the fence as to whether to give this like kind of another go or to just switch gears because there are other books about AIM out there. So I don't know if it would be worth doing this one. That I don't know. If anyone has read the book, please give me your input, or like if he reveals later in the book why he decides to pick it back up and it's like an actual reason that's good or something. You'd think that you would say why you picked it back up in the prologue if it was some anything, especially like profound or whatever. But anyways, that's where I am with that. I need to spend some time looking more thoroughly at my recently purchased physical copy of Like Literally Dude, which I read last month on audio and really liked. I'm gonna be on Sean the Book Maniac's channel talking about this at some point. We're gonna do a Zoom call. But I wanted to go through my copy, kind of flip through again, and tab some of the chapters that I might want to reference or refresh some things, maybe reread some sections, be prepared in some kind of way. I don't know. And then I also have several that I'm considering trying out or reading some of. There is a Palestinian short story collection that I'll put on the screen here because it's in the other room and there's a cat on my lap. So, legally speaking, I can't move until she does. So I'm going to be either looking at that or, I don't know. I have several things. I might put them on the screen. I don't know whether or not it will be even worthwhile to mention them because I don't know which one I'm actually going to pick up. Yeah, that's what I got. This is editing back from November. I'm realizing now that I somehow didn't record my response to Jill Duggar's book. I definitely did finish this in November. I finished it on the 27th, and I made a TikTok about it. I'll rewatch the TikTok, and if that's kind of good enough information, I'm gonna put it here. After that, I listened to Counting the Cost by Jill Duggar, now Dillard, and she is one of the older daughters from the Duggar family of the show 19 Kids and Counting, and she talks a little bit about her childhood, but also a lot about what was going on as an adult in the ways in which she was taken advantage of and hurt. She talks a lot about the media, which was a big parallel with Britney Spears in some ways. and also how her dad took advantage of her, which was another parallel with Britney Spears. While Britney and Joel's dads each used slightly different methods to control their daughters, that sort of terrible men who shouldn't have been in charge of anything was also a very strong connection sort of through there. All right, it is the last day of November, so this will probably be my last entry. I don't really know what this vlog is going to look like. I didn't get hardly any b-roll, but I've been doing things. You might notice this is a different shelf. We switched things around, and didn't film any of it because it was lifting furniture. But, and I just didn't think about it. I finished a couple of things. I've started something else. A couple nights ago, I read Earthkeeper, Reflections on American Land by Scot, Momaday. And this was, it's not technically a poetry collection because each of the entries is prose, but it's a very pretty prose. So more adjacent to a poetry collection. And it's split up into different sections. There is a collection on dawn, things being born, and dusk, things ending. It talks a lot about nature, how people interact with it. It's very nice. I liked it a lot. I read it while I listened to the audiobook, which I think was a really good idea. Not only was my brain just not really wanting to cooperate with me, but it was just nice to kind of hear it out loud as well. Then after that, I finished, or no, I didn't finish. After that, I started another audiobook that I just looked at the title of, and it like exited my brain. But I'll put the cover up here. This is a book that's about this Palestinian American woman who is kind of narrating her life, starting at the very beginning, talking about the kind of weird circumstances around her birth, but it's written as a letter to her great aunt, who is one of the 3 women who raised her. She was born and like proclaimed dead. Like she had her umbilical cord wrapped around her, but then kind of miraculously came back to life and is blue, and that's kind of where the title comes from. And as we're getting kind of her story, we're also getting sort of glimpses into the stories of her mom, grandmother, and great aunt who kind of raised her, as well as the things going on in Palestine, and also kind of within this, what it was like to be Palestinian or Arab, more generally speaking, kind of immediately post 9/11, since that's around the time she was born. And Tonks has also enjoyed listening to it. Or she just wants to smell my breath because she's a weirdo. So I have started that, haven't finished it, but it's very good so far. I did finish this short story collection, Men in the Sun by Ghassan Kanafani. Men in the Sun is the largest collection in this, and then the other ones are a bit shorter. They all take place in Palestine and would have been written, he would be writing probably in the 50s through 60s. He was killed in the early 70s. He was a spokesperson for the PFLP, so he was very involved in the fight for liberation, obviously making him a target. And his politics are reflected within the short stories. There are definitely a lot of layers to the things that are going on. I really liked it. There are definitely ones that I had to, like, I did read it more or less in one sitting, but then went back through to kind of look at it a bit more, and looked a little bit at what other people had gotten from it as well, to kind of understand some of it a bit more, but it was really good. So that's about all that I have. There is a chance that I'll read more today, and if that is the case, I guess I'll, if I finish anything, I'll be back, but I don't imagine. that I'll finish very much. I'm still in the middle of my audiobook, but I have like 10 hours. I'm listening at 1.5 speed, so you can do the math on that. I may also work through some of 100 Years War on Palestine, but it kind of depends just on what the day ends up being. I don't imagine I'll be doing a lot of reading. So this is probably where the video is going to end. Let me know in the comments what you've been reading this nonfiction November, and thank you so much for watching. Bye.